Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Solutions webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Science in Energy, Policy and Climate program, the Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Policy program, and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on the changing face of sports under climate change. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Sustainable Solutions playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Lama Elhatow, Program Coordinator and Lecturer for the Master of Science in Energy, Policy and Climate program and the Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Policy program.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and welcome everyone. Welcome so much to our panel today on the changing face of sports under climate change. My name is Lama Elhatow, and I am the Program Director and Lecturer in the Master's in Environmental Science and Policy and Master's in Energy Policy and Climate at Johns Hopkins University. Today, we've got an incredible panel coming up. I'm super excited about this. We're looking at the changing face of sports under climate change, which basically is highlighting everything from critical intersection between environmental sustainability and athletic performance. With rising temperatures, extreme weather, and deteriorating air quality, it's reshaping how and where can we actually have sports be played safely, particularly outdoor and endurance events. So what we're seeing now is traditional training schedules, competition formats, and even the viability of certain sports are being challenged. Competitive sports, especially outdoor sports, are increasingly vulnerable to heat stress and air pollution and unpredictable conditions, which can impact athlete health and fairness in play. So this shift is calling for innovative adaptation strategies, from things like eco-conscious infrastructure to revised regulations to ensure that sports remain inclusive, safe, and resilient in a warming world. With this transformation, not only affects athletes and organizers, but also has profound implications for the livelihoods that are tied to the sports tourism sector. So with regions that rely on hosting competitive events, such as mountains, ski resorts, coastal surf destinations, or even marathon cities, facing economic instability as seasons will shorten, conditions become unpredictable, and visitor numbers begin to decline. So you start seeing that local businesses, hospitality services, and entire communities will suffer financially, underscoring the need for sustainable planning and climate resilient infrastructure to protect both the spirit of the sport and the economies that support it. This webinar here today is going to be talking about sports and the changing face of many of these sectors and the various evolutions that affect not only the athletes, but everyone around them. I'm extremely honored to present to you our three panelists for today. First, we'll have Rawia Abdallah. Rawia is an endurance athlete, mountaineer, and independent strategy consultant whose expeditions to some of the world's highest peaks, including Gasherbern, Ecuador's highest volcanoes, Aconcagua, and Denali, have given her firsthand insight into how climate change is reshaping competitive and adventure sports. She brings over 18 years of experience advising governments, investors, and high-growth companies across the Middle East and North Africa, leading national transformation programs and innovation initiatives in sectors including education, tourism, entrepreneurship, and sustainability. Rawia holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BA in Business and Mass Communication from the American University in Cairo. She is also a certified coach and Enneagram practitioner, so welcome very much, Rawia. Our second panelist that we have with us today is Nikita Uberoy. Nikita is the program director for the Climate Crossroads Initiative at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM. Before transitioning to a career in climate, she competed on a professional women's tennis circuit for 8 years. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from Brown University and is currently very proud of pursuing a master's in our very own program, our Environmental Science and Policy program here at Johns Hopkins. Welcome, Nikki. We're super happy to have you with us. And Sarah, last but not least, Sarah Sin has over a decade of experience in the sustainability field. She started out in the oil and gas industry, focusing on environmental compliance and carbon reduction efforts within various operations. Her career took her to the technology world, where she led sustainability management systems and built corporate sustainability strategies from the ground up. She is now the head of environment for FIFA 26, which will be hosted right here in the United States next year, where she leads a team across 3 host countries to deliver a sustainability legacy around mega sporting events in North America. She hails from Houston, Texas, but currently resides in Miami, Florida, where she manages the sustainability agenda for FIFA 26 headquarters. Thank you, everyone, and we're super excited and happy to have you all with us. With that, we'll begin small presentations by each of our panelists, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A from everyone that is with us here. With that, we'll start with Roya. Roya, would you like to share your presentation?
Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited about talking about a topic that is very close to my heart. Little background, I did not play any sport growing up, so I only started playing sport 5 years ago. And I started because I was interested in nature. I like nature, I like being in nature. And with COVID, this begins a journey of exploration and training and taking mountains seriously. And also training for Ironman and Ironman 70.3. And this is going to be the lens that I speak about today, more from my personal experience rather than research or scientific facts, but what I've seen changing in the mountain and what I hear also from the Sherpas and the people that I go to the mountains with. In the summer, I went to Pakistan to climb 8,000 meters. The plan was to climb Gasherbrum 2 and Gasherbrum 1. Gasherbrum 2 is at 8,035 and Gasherbrum 1 at 880. And this was interesting. I was talking with Lama over the summer because you see in real life and you see firsthand what's happening. So this season, Gasherbrum 2 had absolutely no summits. No one was able to summit Gasherbrum 2 because of the avalanche risks. This happened also in another mountain in Karakoram range, which is Broad Peak. So to have 2 mountains with 2 summits in a season is a big thing. People were waiting for 2 months, but there was no summit window. But we successfully, I mean, we were lucky because we were climbing G2 and G1. G1, we were able to climb it. So I'll talk about few of the things that I saw there. First, the routes were changing. So as we were hiking at the beginning of any expedition, you hike to base camp. As we were hiking, and the hiking route often does not taken only by mountaineers, but by hikers. And we cross these kind of bridges that you see a little bit, sometimes a bit bigger. And some of the around 11-hour day. Also, when we got to base camp, supposedly from the route from base camp to camp 1 takes around 6-7 hours. We got to base camp. There were some expeditions before us, but no one was able to reach camp 1 because of bigger than usual crevasses. So the Sherpas and high altitude guides had to get together. They had to reroute, and then we ended up with a super long day to camp 1. At some point, we thought we might not be able to get to camp 1 because the crevasses were impossible to cross. So what was usually where we would use ladders was impossible to cross now, and this is because of the climate change. And this is making the mountains less accessible because of more challenging conditions. We had very little time to acclimatize. We were supposed to spend, we acclimatize before we go on the summit push. So we spend time on high altitude. We go down to base camp to rest, and then we do the summit push. Instead of spending like 4 or 5 days, we were only able to spend 2 days on the high altitude. So we went on the summit push without properly acclimatizing because we had to go down because the weather was going bad. Longer wait time at base camp. I was there the entire period. We sometimes the usual time for the expedition is around 40 days. I was there for 2 months, and luckily I summited. But people on K2 and on Broad Peak, they stayed there for even longer, and most of them did not summit. And there is also increased risk, especially for vulnerable populations. We had a group, which was very interesting expedition of older group, and then they had to leave after going to Camp 1 because the route was super long. They were able to have mid-camp, but then the summit push was going to be impossible for them. So mountains are really becoming less accessible, and this is affecting the high altitude workers because of lower summit rates. So we're going to have less visitors in the coming years. There is a bonus. They have daily wages, but they depend big time on the summit bonus. So this is decreasing. So even if you give bonus, like the summit bonus is going to be bigger for them. And with longer expeditions, they can mainly in these seasons, they can do one expedition because they have to stay for the entire season on the mountain, and they cannot take another shorter, like 5,000er or 6,000er, because the wait time is basically very long and the summit window is very short. For Gasherbrum 1, which we successfully summited, we only had 3 days. So all the teams summited this year in 3 days, and 3 days back to back. So if you were sick in these 3 days, it's done. So mountains are really becoming much less accessible. I wanted to touch, because I also do triathlon, and I've seen significant challenges related to that. And I also see it with my friends who do trail running, because of changing weather patterns, increased heat and pollution. You have route changes. So the number of times we have swim canceled or swim delayed because of the water quality, and the number of times also I got on the water, but I got sick after that during the race and I had to throw up because the water quality was not good. So probably met the tests, but were not good enough. Is multiple. We see the trail running. We see the routes changing very often. Heat impact. These are from my photos from Kona and from a race that I did in Goa, India last week. The organizers have to deal with that. You have to have lots of ice. You have to have sponges, and this definitely reduces performance. But we have to be conscious about like how we can adapt to the increased heat. So mainly tracking conditions, and knowing when to stop. Training, and I think Nikita will talk about this more in details, but training also for variability and what happens. So pre-race preparation, heat impact, and also reducing the impact during expeditions by being more sustainable and environmentally conscious. And also the good gear that we're lucky that now we have gear that helps us adapt to different conditions. Yeah. So these are few observations. Thank you so much, and we'll happy to answer some questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Roya, and definitely incredibly insightful about what's been happening on many of, not just on terms of the mountaintops, but also in terms of the races and how people are beginning to change different routes, and especially around the water quality, how the water quality is becoming a lot poorer. These are all things that we really do need to take into consideration as well. So thank you for highlighting that. Nikita, if we can go to you next.
Really impressive and fascinating, Roya. And I'll just start by saying it's really great to be here on this panel with all of these very accomplished women in the sports arena. So Lama asked me to share about what climate change means for the future of competitive sports. And as a former professional tennis player, I have to be honest and say I didn't really make this link until after I stopped competing professionally about 2.5 years ago. That link between climate change and its impact on tennis or sports. And looking back, I can see the connections that athletes, sports fans, and all those involved in the sports ecosystem have with our changing climate. And looking ahead, I'd like to share why we should care. To paint a picture, this was taken during a professional tennis tournament I played in Singapore in 2019. And I vividly remember getting on at 12 p.m. The sun was at its peak. The temperature was well over 90 degrees. And I was thinking, these are the hottest conditions I've ever played in. And the rest of the tournaments I played in Asia that summer only felt worse. Weather and climate are at the forefront of day-to-day decisions that an outdoor athlete makes. You check the weather multiple times a day to schedule your practice, to anticipate rain delays, or to know how much to hydrate before a match. I've even had to evacuate mid-tournament because of a hurricane. You may need to decide whether to practice at 6 a.m. to beat the heat or at 11 a.m. to acclimatize to the heat and build toughness for match conditions. These are all decisions that athletes, coaches, referees, and sporting organizations have to make. But if we take a step back, it doesn't just apply to athletes, right? This applies to sports participants at all levels. Young kids at summer camps, college athletes, fans, and outdoor recreation enthusiasts. As an athlete, as others I'm sure are aware, you're taught to push past your boundaries, persevere no matter what, and that grit builds true champions. And I think those things all still ring true, but we have to understand we live in a new reality. The reality is we're experiencing unprecedented temperatures and humidity levels that we've never seen before, and more widespread impacts from wildfires and extreme weather conditions. As outdoor athletes, the most immediate climate risk we experience is extreme heat. I think about when I spent months training in China, so I was technically acclimatized and still suffered from heat exhaustion during practice. I showed up the next day to the courts remembering and feeling like I just run a 5K every time I hit a ball. You're just like out of breath. You don't know if you're going to make it through your next step or not. And extreme conditions like these have been showing up more and more in tennis headlines. As we can see here, players are being very vocal about it. Daniil Medvedev, ranked number 3 in the world in 2023 at the US Open, said famously, "One player is going to die," when referring to the sweltering conditions. And last month, a professional men's tournament in Shanghai, China, featuring top tennis players around the world, had several players retire from extreme heat and humidity conditions. Jannik Sinner, who's world number 2, Novak Djokovic, who I'm sure you've heard of, world number 5, and others suffered from heat-related illnesses and complained about and experienced vomiting, cramping, losing consciousness. These are some of the most elite, most fit athletes in the world, with access to the best nutritionists, trainers, and sports scientists, and even they were struggling. The temperature was over 91 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity levels around 80%. And if we put that in perspective, if you look at this heat index from NOAA, that puts you at feels like 113 degrees in the orange zone, where heat stroke is possible. So, as the science shows us, this is not a mind over matter issue. Right now, for the men's tennis tour, outside of the Grand Slams, decisions on the suspension of play due to extreme heat lie with the local on-site supervisor who coordinates with medical teams at the venue. After this recent incident, the ATP is now open to implementing a more formal and global heat rule. If we move over to the women's side of things, Iga Swiatek, world number 2, recently mentioned, "I feel like it's getting hotter in different places over the years. I'm just trying to use my experience, recover well between the points, and just spend all my energy on having the best quality possible. But for sure, it's a challenge." Heat rules we've seen implemented on the women's tennis tour allow for a 10-minute break, but only between the second and third sets, and suspension of play after temperatures and humidity thresholds are reached. In other sports, some have more formal rules, and others have guidelines, but no requirements, leaving it to the discretion of individual associations, tournaments, and coaches to make their own policies and decisions for extreme weather conditions, and for individuals who are active themselves to educate themselves. I've shown these examples from tennis to say we need to be educating ourselves, other athletes, and the whole sports community really, parents, fans, umpires, regulators, governing bodies, on the climate risks of sports to athlete health and performance to safeguard the future of sports. We're seeing climate impacts across sports, from outdoor swimmers and runners to skiers and F1 drivers to mountaineers. Many of these risks are sport-specific because our reactivity has a different surface, equipment, location, length, and endurance demand. We also see infrastructure damage from hurricanes and wildfires and the like. And if we think about this holistically, we can learn from one another to better adapt to the changing conditions and optimize athletic performance for the next generation of athletes to not only survive, but thrive. I'll conclude by saying we're starting to make these connections, but we need to be proactively setting up better guidelines and policies, making changes to tournament schedules and locations across the board, especially at a time where climate disruptions in sports are increasing more and more, and we're experiencing these extreme weather events that are unprecedented. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for that. Very insightful indeed. And definitely wasn't aware of all that's happening to some of those pro tennis athletes out there. Thank you for sharing that. Sarah, we can now head to you and see what FIFA as a large organization is also planning on doing moving forward with all of these impacts that we're beginning to see. Floor is yours.
Hard acts to follow. So kudos to Nikita and Huawei for sharing really good stuff. Hi everyone. As Lama said, I'm Sarah Hussein. I'm the head of environment for FIFA 26 for the World Cup that's happening next year. And my angle for just a couple of minutes will really be as a sporting league, how best can we organize our events for the fans, the players, and the event overall in the most sustainable manner. So hopefully we'll weave quite well into what Rovia and Nikita just mentioned. So I'll go through kind of what FIFA 26's standpoint is and all the work that myself and the team is doing. So I've got a team that's based in Miami and then also in Mexico City and Toronto, since next year's World Cup is in 3 countries. So we're definitely expanding our footprint. So, how can sustainability play a role has definitely been an uphill battle. So just a little bit of a history lesson, not to take up too much time, but FIFA as a whole, which is based out of Zurich, Switzerland, is part of the UN Sport for Climate Action framework. So our public target is that we have a 50% reduction of our overall operational emissions by 2030. So everything that my team does is working towards that goal. This is the last World Cup prior to 2030 to really make a true impact or dent in that target. So just to give a little bit of background, that's kind of what we lean on as a team as we build up our strategic objectives. So we've got a public strategy around sustainability. So feel free to Google, you'll see it, which has really 7 key objectives. And I promise I won't bore you all through this because I know I don't have slides like everyone else. So I'll try to make this as interesting as possible in the next couple of minutes. So our 7 key objectives, and once again, is looking at climate action throughout and its impact across, players, fans, and the event. So starting with sustainable infrastructure that I believe was mentioned right at the beginning, and really understanding the venues we're going into, the temporary venues we're going to start having, and seeing what can we implement to really make those venues as sustainable as possible. And existing venues are the biggest challenge for this World Cup. So we're really pushing requirements on our venues to get sustainable certifications to make sure that we're working at a similar baseline when it comes to operations and sustainability. So that's a key thing that we're working on within that objective. Secondly, shocking to no one, climate impact is a huge objective for us. So really understanding how are we proofing our carbon footprint as we calculate it for the entire tournament. Because we not only want to keep ourselves accountable, but we also want to see where are we going, what does our impact really look like when we try to quantify it. So that's been a new way of looking at it for FIFA in this World Cup, where we really try to nail down our methodology because we're working across 3 countries and 16 cities. Then reducing air pollution is another key objective for us. And this is really where we look at what are our energy sources as we're going into obviously fully built out, cities, markets, venues, and seeing, okay, what are the energy sources at play? What can we bring in to help with what type of energy pool we're going to have. So really looking at battery storage and solar opportunities that FIFA can bring in to really mitigate our operational impact. Excuse me. Another key objective for us is around circularity. So as you can imagine, we're throwing an event, attempting to throw a party. And so we're going to procure a lot of things. So what do we do with those things? What type, are we renting them? Are we buying them? Then what's our dissolution around it? What's going to happen when the World Cup ends, the party ends, we turn off the lights? All of that goes into how we look at circularity when we look at this tournament. Water conservation, huge piece of our strategic objectives as well. What are our operational pieces that are going to be using the biggest sources of water? And that's our pitch. And that's also then within the communities that we're going into, where these games will pull from local supplies that'll take away from those communities. So really trying to see where we can mitigate those impacts the best possible. Another one is around biodiversity and wildlife protection. So really understanding, hey, there's going to be green spaces, there's going to be protected areas that we're going into as we put on these games. What types of training do we need of our staff? And then what types of processes and procedures do we need to put in place to best protect those areas? So another key piece for us and the team. And then lastly, around fan education. So really trying to see, hey, how everything that we're doing, obviously I'm getting the opportunity today to tell this group, but then how do we make it a lasting impact for our fans? What pieces do we want them to take home? So it's just a little bit of what we're doing. We've got a small to-do list, as you can see, but we've been trying to stay busy the last 2 years. And what myself and the team really knows is that obviously I know I focus a lot on operations, but everything that we do affects the players and the fans as the event goes on. So my aim has always been to try to keep sustainability at play, no pun intended, when it comes to not only this World Cup, but as the World Cups continue, because it's only going to grow. FIFA's aim is to always make it bigger and better the next time. So really excited to get into the discussion today, but just wanted to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing all that FIFA is trying to do, especially lowering its carbon footprint and sustainability initiatives. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rauya. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for your incredibly insightful presentations. We'll now open up the floor for any questions from the audience. So please also put them into the chat or in the Q&A section. And Dr. Rachel Isaacs, my colleague, will also help me filter through them. So please do start doing those as you come. But before we start getting enrolling in questions from our audience, if you'll allow me, I've got a question or two that I can actually ask before everybody comes in. But I have a question around communities. So what we do know is how that climate change is going to be impacting the most vulnerable communities, which obviously includes developing countries like LDCs, least developed countries, and SIDS, small island developing states. With a lot of the athletes from the developing world training outdoors, not having access to indoor air-conditioned facilities, how does it put them at a disadvantage to compete in these global events like the Olympics or like FIFA or otherwise? And I think about this, I think about the common example that we always hear about is how Brazilian football players, soccer players, are so good because they're always playing barefoot on the beach. That basically, ideally, will they be able to continue to do so with sea level rise, with coastal erosion, and with the increased temperatures that we're beginning to see from climate change? So if anyone wants to take a first shot at that.
I can jump in here. I think this is a really big issue, and it's very important to think about, we're not just talking about elite athletes when we're talking about sports. We're talking about people, who are playing for fun, people who are kicking around a ball outside, people with aspirations and dreams to make it to the big level one day. And they need resources to be able to do that. They need to be able to train appropriately. And when people come from, I'll just start by saying we know that the global south is being disproportionately impacted by climate change, right? And if we're seeing this and these people also have fewer resources to have indoor training facilities or the right equipment or hydration supplements, this will be a huge issue. And to paraphrase a sports ecologist, Maddie Orr, she said, if we want to say you're the best in the world in a sport, we need the whole world participating to say that. And I think that's really powerful because we need to be supporting people from all backgrounds. Like, sports already has an equity issue, and we're just exacerbating this with climate change. And this really needs to be addressed because as climate challenges escalate, these marginalized populations will have to face these barriers to participation more and more. And we want to be supporting the next generation of athletes. We want to see the global south performing better at the Olympics and having more representation at the international stage.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, Nikki. Does anyone else want to comment?
No, I think also the access to data and gear, because it's expensive to practice these sports safely, and the climate change puts additional challenge. Like, you need to know how much your sweat rate, you need to know, okay, how much sodium you need to have per hour. And this becomes more critical if you see how people were playing and practicing sport like 30, 40 years ago. There was less data, but there's also fewer challenges when it comes to how people were running marathons like 30, 40 years ago. Was basic knowledge about nutrition and heat and core body temperature. But also there were fewer challenges when it comes to the expectations also and the changes of the weather.
Absolutely.
And I'll just add to Raria's point that now you're pitting the people with maximum resources, right, with these technologies and tools against people who don't have that. And we saw that at the Olympics last year, where the athletes were not provided air conditioning units in their hotel rooms, and those with access to the ability to afford those had it, and those who didn't had to suffer in those conditions.
Thanks for
Yeah.
that, Nikki.
And
Go
I'll just round out, coming from a sporting organization, I look at it as an accountability issue as well for all sporting organizations and leagues to say, okay, hey, whether it's an event or whatever you're putting on, knowing that, hey, if you need to limit your impact so that those carryover effects don't go into these areas that are more inclined to have the impacts of climate change, and also provide those resources, as what Raria mentioned, of like, hey, what is the proper care and all of that you have to do as an athlete, and providing those resources in those communities. So looking kind of twofold, being like, hey, how do you limit your impact as you're going into these areas, but then also providing those resources as an organization that has that reach.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's actually really, really helpful for us to be able to garner a little bit more understanding of how things are moving as well, and what it is that we can potentially do to help also apply some kind of support or assistance to those from developing countries in order to be able to compete and have that competitive advantage at the same time. We are getting a bunch of rolling questions coming in. So even though I did want to ask another one myself, I'll put that on hold for now, and I'll go into some of the other ones that are coming. From Colleen, there is a question around FIFA specifically, and this is Sarah directed towards you. And this is asking on how can you please expand on how FIFA is reducing their carbon footprint? And in light of that, maybe Sarah, we could expand on that slightly and mention that the World Cup that took place 4 years ago in Qatar came under a lot of criticism and a lot of heat, as we've discussed this before, around this idea of building indoor stadiums and what that entailed, and increasing their carbon footprint because of what it entailed, because Qatar is in fact in a dry desert climate, and with increased heat temperatures, wanted to make sure that the athletes as well as the fans were in a comfortable setting to reduce that. But got a lot of heat. They got a lot of criticism and a lot of heat around building these indoor stadiums that were very, very energy intensive and drove up their carbon footprint immensely. That being said, with the World Cup happening again next year here in North America and during the summer months, we wonder if the same thing will persist. Will we continue to build indoor stadiums? And is this the fate of what needs to happen with competitive sports altogether, or not? Or are there other strategies? So in the light of sharing around FIFA's strategies of reducing carbon footprint, if you can also speak to the little bit around that too, around indoor stadiums or indoor sporting in general, and what that necessarily means, that would be great.
Yeah, no, both great questions. Thanks, Lama, and thanks, Colleen. So I'll start with yours, Lama, if that's all right, and then I think it'll feed well into a general point I have for Colleen. So, hear you on the Qatar piece, and where I'd say FIFA's leaning into now, because in the past 2-3 World Cups, there's been a lot of, well, we've got to build these stadiums or venues, excuse me, from scratch, and then on top of that, we're making it an indoor stadium. We're not even saying, hey, we're just going to create an outdoor one. Is that leaning into existing venues? Now, understood, that's not a blanket, like that's a great solution, but let's look at this at a happy medium level. So where, hey, let's not construct more, which takes its own impacts, but let's go into existing venues, indoor and outdoor. It varies across the 16 markets for the World Cup. and bring our solutions in to actually limit what those indoor venue impacts are, where, we're blasting the AC out of it, or, utilizing, different types of waste management processes, all of the things that go into operation. So that's one thing that FIFA is leaning into, is that, hey, let's go into existing venues and try to then bring solutions to help mitigate the impacts of those types of indoor venues. So I know it's not the answer that perhaps, would appease everyone, but that's kind of one way that FIFA is trying. Now, overall reductions, a pretty big mandate, 50% of our operational emissions needs to be reduced. So great question on like, how are we even working that out in our footprint? So really the approach that we have taken is we've got about 60 different departments that make the World Cup run. And all those, get stood up at every World Cup within the country that's hosting it, or the 3 or the 4 as we move forward. Of those 60, what are the most high impact is what we look at when we look at reductions. So that's engineering, transport, travel, catering. We look at these high impact areas and we work with those departments to say, what alternative ways of operating can you do? That will actually bring a significant quantifiable reduction. So our goal in 2026 is to reduce our emissions from Qatar by 20%, using Qatar as a baseline. So not to get into the nitty gritty, but so of the 60, there are 20 high impact ones that we're looking at, Colleen, where we've agreed with those departments to bring that total of a 20% reduction in our overall carbon footprint.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. With that, we'll go to another question. And this question is from Jackson Thompson. So speaking of global sports, Jackson says that I'm curious if you're seeing any specific countries leading in policy making or addressing these issues among their national sports teams and organizations, and what steps they're necessarily taking. So I'm not sure who feels comfortable to answer that one, but anyone is, please do so.
Just from limited knowledge on this and speaking to tennis, I would say from the adaptation standpoint, Australia has been kind of a pioneer in heat rules, as you can imagine. It has been facing this for much longer than many other countries have, and they were the first ones to have a heat rule for their Grand Slam, the Australian Open, and they have just been doing an all-around better job, I think, in protecting their tennis players and athletes from playing at the right times and keeping an eye out on extreme heat conditions.
Great call out, Nikita. And I'll just say I may not pick out a specific country, but I will pick out a peer that we definitely look towards as FIFA, UEFA, the Union of European Football, that's really making a lot of strides as they also operate in various countries as they put on their sporting events that bring together a lot of different leagues. But really, seeing what types of initiatives and ways of operating that they're doing across different European countries has really been an interesting thing to see, and FIFA is definitely looking at as what can be taken and moved outside of just the Europe bubble, if I can say it in a safe space, because that definitely in itself is something that could make some things easier, other things harder, as FIFA moves on to going back to the Middle East or going into other parts of Europe. So, but that's when I'd call out and say that they're doing some interesting stuff that we're even looking at.
Thanks so much, both of you. I do want to go to a next question, and this is actually from our very own Evie Cummings. She mentions that this is an excellent panel. I must admit, I rarely hear anyone discussing these essential issues with regards to sports. Mainly, I seem to hear popular press framing this in terms of how sports versus events impact on climate versus the impact of climate on athletes and its terrain. So what is being done to quantify the impacts on athletes, courses, courts, etc., so as to bring this into wider public awareness, let alone sports management degree programs across universities? Any insights to that? Thank you, Evie, for that question.
I'll just jump in and say conversations like these. I think this is a topic that's really coming out to the forefront. just recently in the last couple of years, but there have been people working on this. There is a whole field called sports ecology where they look at the interactions between our natural environment and our sports to look into how we can better protect athletes and also sports in general from climate risks and other environmental risks. So there are people who are researching this. There have been some reports, such as one on the climate risks in F1. So I think this is an up-and-coming research area, but to my knowledge, I don't think there's been anything very comprehensive, but certainly a lot of reports coming out that are either sports-specific or region-specific about the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, and I see also lots of reports about the changes in the conditions on the mountain. I'm not sure, honestly, if there is link between these scientific reports and policy and practitioners, people who actually make decisions on the mountain, governments who open seasons or who give permits. I'm not sure, honestly, if there is a link between the two, but there is a lot of like research and data about the melting glaciers, the risk of ice falls in the Campo region. But yeah, I think the link probably between actioning these results is what we're missing.
And I can round out real quick. Great question. And, I'll just use a quick example. So FIFA held the Club World Cup this past summer in the US across 12 markets. And heat for athletes, heat stress was a huge issue, shocking to no one probably on this call, that came up because, we held matches in Miami at noon. And then, in similar, examples in other cities. And so how, as we look at, the sport, the soccer, the football world, as we move forward for athletes, as these, climate risks are coming up, is definitely we look at our operations and we look at, okay, something that you mentioned, Nikita, earlier, of like the schedule of the matches. Let's just start there, and then, how best can that work for athletes, that are going to compete, but so many other things as well. Cooling solutions, let's say if we can't move it, and it's going to be at noon in Miami in the summer. What is that? And to your point, Lama, is it going to be like Qatar where we just blast the AC on the pitch for the players? Or is there something else that we can do as we go into these existing venues to not only maintain the performance and comfort of the athletes, but then also for, to keep sustainability at play? So it's definitely something that's coming to mind. I can say that organizations are definitely struggling with it, but there are solutions out there that that because of even the vocalness of the athletes, that were, organizations are being forced to deal with. So agreed, it's up and coming.
Thank you for that. And it's true. I mean, the energy intensive, the amount of energy that it takes to just not just cool these at these stadiums, but just all around for these sports to occur is huge carbon footprint, not to mention water footprint. These events tend to be incredibly carbon and water footprint intensive. So that's something that we need to really keep in mind when we host these events for hundreds of thousands of people at any given time. Thank you for that. There is another question. There's several other questions, but there is a question that's coming in from Malak Kibish, and this is, she's mentioning for Rawia. Rawia, what inspired you to start extreme sports despite having no sports background? I'm also wondering what sentiments were regarding climate change amongst the local villagers in Asia. Did you find it to be widely discussed, or are they more cognizant on the day-to-day? And also another question for Sarah, by Malak, she mentions, how does FIFA weigh branding against impact? For example, in drink services, FIFA has used branding cups at events like the Club World Cup, but in unbrandable reusables could deliver better environmental results. And how do you approach that trade-off? I think you spoke to this also a little bit as well. So Rawia,
Yeah, so basically love for nature. I remember very well I went on a trek, something that is not technically demanding or anything, in 2015 in Nepal, in Poon Hill, which is 3,500, very easy, very accessible. But from this peak, I saw the sunset on 6, 7, and 8,000 years. It was beautiful. It was one of the most magical sunrises that I've ever seen. And at that moment, I thought, oh, wow, how wonderful would it be to be on one of those mountains. And a few years later, I started my journey. So it was basically inspired by just love and fascination by nature. And yes, I think in the villagers, and I see this a lot in Nepal because I go very often. They're conscious of the changes in the pattern of the tourists, because if you look at the local communities, they're exposed to two major factors: the risks, because of the change in the weather. So the icefall in the Kambu region, the unpredictability of the icefall is increased in the last decade by 25 to 30%. So this is huge. And when we think about it, like before the season starts, the Sherpas and the icefall doctors, they go on to fixing ropes. So they go unsupported. So they take extra risk. So this is increased risk of injuries, increased risks of deaths and accidents. So they're exposed to that. The other thing is the cyclicality of their income, because they're very dependent on the income from some of the villagers. 70% of their income is coming from tourism. So they see how a bad season is impacting their livelihood. Yeah.
Can take the second one. Great question. How long do we have left? That's a big one. It's a daily conversation that I have with the organization across the 3 countries. So I don't think the sporting world is unique to this. I'll put, instead of branding, I'll put commercial pressure versus then, you know, the climate impact. I've seen it across industries, and it's not unique to sport, but it's here as well. Where how do you combat that, and what is the trade-off? I think it's framed well. So, you know, we're seeing there's many going into existing venues where there are already like reusable cup systems. And so, you know, how do we come in with our commercial partners who, hey, it might be a Pepsi stadium, but Coke is our sponsor. So that's just a tip of the iceberg of the trials and tribulations that we have. But the way, as a sustainability professional coming in, first and foremost, pushing for let's still try to use reusable or compostable, or for just the baseline recyclable, but as much as we can push higher, right, is the goal of myself and the team in all 3 countries. So obviously, I think you went to a match, Malak, for the Club World Cup. Great. You're right, we did. We had one that was branded, and that is something that, you know, we maybe cannot get away from, but other options were presented that could also have been branded. Once again, battles. The trade-off that we made as a sustainability team was, okay, then let's make sure on the back end that we've got our waste management processes clear in place. We've got the hauling clear in place. We're seeing that life cycle all the way through that cup that is branded, that we make sure that does get recycled. And we've got ways that we have done that. So that due diligence on the back end is our way of trying to build off that trade-off of, like, let's just make sure it actually gets recycled, composted, reused, whatever it may be. Which I understand, once again, is that something that appeases the whole crowd? I understand. But that's where, as a sustainability professional coming in, seeing, okay, let's definitely fight the good fight, and we start there. If that's not the case, we put in those mitigation measures within the organization to make sure that if you're still going to pick that solution, how can we still make sure that that solution doesn't have a larger impact than it should? So that's one way that we've kind of looked at it and tried to make the right trade-offs. But great question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. Definitely, it's a balance that needs to be just struck with sponsors, especially when you need to be able to pay for a lot of what's coming in as well at the same time, but also make sure that you're being authentic to the climate vision that you're also trying to do with your sports. So wonderful. Thank you for bringing that in. There is a question by Kata around storytelling, which is a beautiful question. From Kata Molnar. She says, hi all, fascinating panel. My question is related to the fact that athletes' voices have massive cultural reach. In tennis, which has no team or league platform, how can individual players use their stories to make sustainability relatable without feeling like they're stepping outside of sport? And if I can extend this to other sports as well, this could be done in terms of relatability to other sports as well, maybe to mountaineering, to roya, and to others. And how do you actually make it relatable? And I think that this is a beautiful exercise in storytelling as well.
I can start us off here. That's a great question and something I think about a lot. especially having been a tennis player, I think about why I didn't make this connection before. And I think the sport, individual sports particularly, gives you a really myopic lens. You have to be selfish. You have to be thinking about yourself, and you lose that global kind of connection on what's actually happening, right? You're thinking of your day-to-day, your next meal, how you're optimizing. And bringing that connection, I think, is where we can kind of have athletes now come in and make the links to climate change. They're clearly being very vocal about it. They know they're pushing past their body's limits. We saw that with the examples that I showed. And I think taking it a step further and using that as a platform to be advocating for climate action and climate mitigation is the way that all athletes can continue to show that this is a problem that's very much affecting their day-to-day. And if they want, and we all want, future generations of athletes to be able to have the same access to sport and enjoy it in the same way we have, that there are some adaptation and mitigation efforts that need to be made.
Yeah, I'll build on that, the accessibility, which is because I'm someone who was fascinated by nature, and this is how I got to extreme sport. And I would love to see the coming generation being able to access these mountains. And I think we're starting to see this, like this season in Everest was the first ski descents, and it was integral part of the story. That this is, okay, these are the two first successful ski descents in different routes. And it's great that they happened now because we might not be able to have them in the future because of the changing conditions of the glacier. So I saw this this was at the core of the conversation because in a few years probably no one would be able to ski down such big mountains. Yeah.
So this comes also to several questions have come around storytelling and the use of storytelling in sports, specifically when it comes to climate change, but also around communication. And this idea also that I'd like to get with you is there's also a question here that was coming in from Jackson again that was mentioning, as well as many others, around storytelling. That what communication levers are you actually pulling to get the messaging out to the fans and to broader community around what is happening on climate and sports? So this is also something to be addressed as how are we doing that? How are we getting the message out to people about what's happening in the sports industry?
I can start us off. So from a sporting organization, I'll say, we look at what are activations that we can have at our event and the lead up to the event. So that it's in doing it as a two-way street. One, not obviously showcasing, hey, how does, let's say, obviously FIFA take sustainability seriously, but also how does FIFA understand the concerns of that local community or fan base on what they believe is important in sustainability. So I'll start with like the lead up to the World Cup. We're constantly not only holding small forums in the markets we're going into to hear from the local community what is most important on the sustainability front. We lean on the cities, but they bring myself and the team in across the 3 countries so that we know what's important in that market, where then we can also somewhat tailor what we're bringing into those venues or to those temporary builds that we're doing. And doing that across 16 obviously is a lift in itself. It's a little different for this World Cup, but I know they've done that in the past as well. So we have that interplay of so that we know what's important to them and they know what's important to us, and we find kind of that middle ground of where we can obviously or educate each other both ways. I'd say the other piece that we do is at the event level. So where we look at how can we not force, because I don't want to use that word, but I don't have a better word this late in the evening, is, fans to really think about sustainability in a way that's applicable to them. So it's like, what are those choices that we can push them towards? So is that getting a, plant-based meal at that stadium? Is it riding the train back home rather than taking, an Uber or their own car, so on and so forth? And what does that activation look like? And that's what we're framing for 26, but I know they've tried in the past as as well, but something that's interactive and something that then not only makes them relate to the match, but then also brings sustainability home to them and wherever they end up going. So that's definitely two different ways we're looking at it.
To just draw on the, storytelling that athletes have the power to make is athletes are some of the most influential people on the planet. I mean, look at the followings they have all across social media. I think, if they say something, people are going to listen. And so identifying athletes that are willing to have this conversation. I know there are many, and there are groups of athletes who are, in, WhatsApp communities around this, and who are talking about this. But just spreading the word more to get the really, big names to be talking about this to show that they're being impacted, and also that they're, in the movement to fight the climate crisis.
Thank you for that, both. I think also one of the points that was coming up as well within the questions in the Q&A and comments is around coalition building and the use of coalition building to also garner support from NGOs, from private sector, from others, to be able to also create that kind of awareness for communication when we start telling our stories appropriately. If we look at many private sector companies that have really done quite a bit of effort within the sports industry, like Patagonia, in terms of what they've officially done for various efforts to reduce their carbon footprint and for sustainability purposes, other private sector companies are doing the same. So that kind of coalition building, I think, if we can really begin to look into how that can garner support for communication, could be really, really helpful. We're almost out of time, so I'll end with one final round of questions for the three of you, if you'll allow me. And this is a question that was coming in from Scout. And Scout is very curious to hear how all you impressive ladies, what were your career journeys coming from? What education degrees and what work experience did you gain to lead to where you are today? What were the key ingredients, quote unquote, to get you to where you are? If we could go do a round on that, that would be great.
Okay, I could start. So I studied business and mass comm as an undergrad, so something that is not related to sport at all. And I'm a business professional. I work in consulting. I work in strategy consulting now. And I think the main thing is I worked for long with startups and this ecosystem. But I decided to do freelance consulting because this also allows me to have time for my sport because of long expeditions. So I think this is the trade-off that I had to make to put the all hats.
Oh, okay. I'll go. All right. I know we're coming down. No, great question. So, I did my undergrad at Smith College in environmental science, not specific to sport, but just, the general field. And then got a master's at Rice here in Texas, in environmental management. So definitely stayed on the environmental sustainability front. But I was always interested in how it applied in various industries. I was always on the kind of the business case for sustainability. So that has always been my focus. So understanding how can you make that across industries. So, started in oil and gas, as Lama said, joined the tech world for a little while, and then kind of stumbled upon FIFA and the mega event sporting world. And what I'd say is that, sustainability is such a huge field. So I'd say, one of the key ingredients for me was to kind of figure out what part of it am I interested in, and hone in on and get some experience. Doesn't mean that's where you stay, because sustainability, I think it's always fluid. But finding that niche kind of early on so that you build some experience in it, so that you can then become that expert and move forward is kind of one of the key ingredients, I'd say, that I tried to focus on.
Similar to Sarah, I studied environmental science at Brown University and was also a varsity tennis player, and then pursued professional tennis for many years, and I was always an eco-conscious athlete. But like I mentioned earlier, I think that connection didn't really set for me until I started working in climate at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine here in DC. And then now I'm pursuing my graduate studies in environmental science and policy at Johns Hopkins. So all of this is really putting it all together for me. But that's how I got to where I am today.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Roya. Thank you for the three of you. And thank you to everyone that's been asking questions and commenting on in the chat. It's been an incredibly enriching conversation. Wonderful to have you all. It's now, unfortunately, we are out of time. If we didn't get to answer any of your questions, we do have them, and so we'll be able to respond to you. This will be recorded, and so you can, and will be uploaded on our YouTube, and so you'll be able to watch it at other times. Thank you so much to everyone, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.